To what many perceived as the perfect family, no one expected that everything would quickly go down in flames. At around 4 a.m. of August 26, 2008, the Shropshire Central Fire Control received the emergency call about a fire on the Osbaston Mansion residence. Upon arrival, firefighters were hindered by a large horsebox that blocked the entrance. By the time they managed to get in, due to the issues they faced trying to enter the residence in the first place, it was already too late and everything had been consumed by the fire. This unfortunately included the owners of the residence, the Foster family. During the investigations, the police found out that the horse trailer that had been blocking the entrance had been deliberately parked there to delay the firefighters. Therefore, this wasn't just an accident. Something far more sinister was behind it. The question arose, who harbored animosity towards this beloved family? Who could be responsible for their tragic demise? The unsettling discovery in the footages recovered by the investigators from the security cameras gave them the answers they sought, but in turn, also sent chills down their spines. This is the shocking case of the Foster family. Christopher Foster, always destined for success, was characterized by his mother, Enid, as a proactive achiever who sought opportunities for financial gain from a very young age. He shared aspirations with his younger brother, Andrew Foster, of emulating their late father, who was a sales director, as they wanted to be successful businessmen. However, despite their common goal, Chris and Andrew's relationship had always been strained since childhood. Andrew later revealed the difficulties in their bond, attributing it to childhood dynamics. Chris, perceived as more confident and self-assured, cast a shadow over his quieter and less assertive brother, Andrew. Both siblings, however, maintained a close relationship with their mother, Enid, who cherished them both, though harboring a special fondness for Chris. In 1987, Chris tied the knot with Jill, a housewife who later gave birth to their daughter and only child, Kirsty, in 1993. Chris's journey to wealth and success in the late 80s began when he worked as a salesman, selling mattresses and cheap pizza boxes for insulation. All changed, and his life took a transformative turn when he witnessed a news report leading him to establish a prosperous engineering company. This venture ultimately propelled him to self-made millionaire status, thanks to the development of a groundbreaking insulation material that would be widely utilized in the oil industry as a result of what he saw on the news. The Piper Alpha oil rig explosion on July 6, 1988, resulted in a devastating fire lasting for days and claiming 167 lives. Chris astutely seized this tragedy as an opportunity, identifying a niche market for fire-protected insulation tailored to gas and oil rigs. Although several oil companies expressed interest, they demanded proof of the product's efficacy before committing to any contracts. To meet this requirement, Chris took a significant financial risk by mortgaging his house for £5,000 to fuel a demonstration. The successful test, where Ulvershield, as he named it, displayed exceptional resilience compared to other oil rig insulations that burst into flames and even earned a rare A1 fire test rating. Major oil corporations promptly placed orders, catapulting Christopher Foster into millionaire status almost overnight. Reports circulated that he was accumulating so much money that he did not know what to do with it. As his business expanded, Christopher experienced a significant increase in turnover, soaring from £50,000 to £1 million annually. According to his personal assistant, it seemed as though Chris was put on earth for the sole purpose of spending a lot of money. Although he allocated himself a monthly salary of £10,000, he was known to withdraw an additional £15,000 from the company's accounts for personal expenses. By 2004, Chris's net worth was reported to be £10 million. During that same year, after a shopping excursion, Chris and his wife Jill had come back home when Jill stumbled upon a house while perusing the pages of Shropshire Life magazine that really captured her attention. This was no ordinary house. It was the Osbaston house, an exquisite mansion nestled in Maesbrook, an affluent village in Shropshire, England. Spanning 16 acres, the property boasted a private lake and even had riding paddocks. Despite the around £1.5 million asking price, the residence still required some work. Jill was so enamored with the property that Chris promptly submitted an offer the following morning. The Fosters quickly sold their own home, relocating to the Osbaston house. Subsequently, Chris invested an additional £50,000 in installing a swimming pool and landscaping. After settling into their new home, Chris indulged in a lavish lifestyle, acquiring 2 Porsches, one for himself and one for Jill, a James Bond-style Aston Martin, Range Rovers, a tractor, and various other vehicles. Their daughter Kirsty was enrolled in an exclusive private boarding school, and Chris also bought her a number of horses. Kirsty spent time with her horses whenever she wasn't at school, and engaging in riding competitions was described by friends as quiet, caring, and kind. On top of that, Chris also bought 4 dogs and several doves. Chris further enhanced their lifestyle by hiring a housekeeper and a personal assistant, and the house was adorned with over £200,000 worth of antique furnishings. Chris's most expensive hobby seemed to be his passion for shooting, evident in his ownership of numerous high-priced guns ranging from £12,000 to £12,500 or almost $20,000 at the time. He frequently participated in shooting parties, sometimes extending for 3 days, resulting in bills reaching as high as £8,000. He also had a tendency of leaving his firearms scattered around his residence. Occasionally, when doves caused a mess on his cars, he would shoot them, much to Jill's dismay. In one disturbing incident, Kirsty's black Labrador began bothering the sheep. Unable to control the dog, Chris resorted to taking it down a country lane and shooting it in the head. Although a thriving entrepreneur, Chris lacked long-term vision, characterized as impulsive by acquaintances. He exhibited a desire for instant gratification and swiftly severed ties, holding grudges against those who displeased or went against him. Chris derived satisfaction from others admiring him and coveting his material wealth. Social status held significant sway in his life, and over time, both Chris and Jill ascended to higher social circles. It became evident to Chris's close ones that he harbored a desire to completely disassociate from his Wolverhampton origins. Jill found joy in going for shopping sprees, dedicating her days to pampering herself with activities like nail and hair appointments, along with occasional beauty treatments such as manicures and Botox. Chris and his loved ones frequently embarked on opulent family vacations, luxuriating in top-tier hotels and relishing the finest cuisine money could offer. These extravagant holidays sometimes incurred costs of up to £20,000 each, a sum Chris didn't hesitate to spend. However, unbeknownst to those in his circle, Chris was significantly stretching his financial limits and compensating by withdrawing funds from the business. His unrestrained spending resulted in a financial imbalance, with more money flowing out than coming in. You see, in 2003, Chris signed an exclusive contract with a company called DRC, granting them sole rights to produce the oil rig sealant he had invented. By 2004, as previously mentioned, his net worth had soared to £10 million. However, a year later in 2005, he found himself saddled with £2.8 million in debt. Rather than implementing cost-cutting measures, Chris, consumed by his spending addiction, attempted to address the issue by seeking additional funds from alternative sources. Despite the exclusivity agreement with DRC, he proceeded to sign a second contract with another company for the sale of his product. DRC discovered this breach and took legal action against Chris, ultimately suing him and acquiring his patent. They in turn made it a global success. Chris faced bankruptcy, and in 2007 his company went into liquidation. £3 million worth of his assets were frozen, and his salary ceased. Despite being in dire straits, Chris persisted in carrying on as if nothing significant was happening. Simultaneously, Chris found himself in a dispute with his accountant, who reported him to the Inland Revenue for tax evasion. Chris had neglected to pay VAT, national insurance, and various other taxes. To tackle the mounting tax obligations, he resorted to borrowing from banks, attempting to alleviate the financial strain. Additionally, he remortgaged the Osbaston house 3 times and overdrew from more than 20 different bank accounts. Despite his outwardly lavish lifestyle and continuous spending, Chris managed to conceal the fact that he was deeply submerged in debt. Over the ensuing 12 months, he engaged in his hobby of clay pigeon shooting and still drove around his extravagant cars. People who knew Jill didn't know for certain if she knew the full extent of her husband's financial troubles or if he had shielded her from the harsh reality, but she certainly didn't show signs of reducing her spending either, and she didn't share any concerns with her friends. Chris found himself grappling with overwhelming challenges, aware that time was slipping away and fearing the imminent loss of everything. During a conversation with a friend about houses,
Chris emphatically stated that he would never part with Osbaston House unless it was in a body bag. He expressed a solemn commitment to safeguarding his family, vowing to take his own life rather than endure the loss of his loved ones or possessions. Struggling with the pressure to maintain his flashy appearances and having the knowledge that time and also his money was running out, Chris sought professional assistance. On multiple occasions, he confided in his doctor, revealing feelings of depression and having thoughts of taking his life. He started taking antidepressants, but his doctor did not take him seriously regarding his thoughts of ending his own life. Little did anyone know at the time that something unimaginable would occur. In the week preceding the August bank holiday weekend of 2008, Chris stumbled upon a letter from the bailiffs attached to the front gate. The letter conveyed the unsettling news that they intended to return the following Tuesday to reclaim the house and other assets. The housekeeper stated that when she showed him the letter, Chris appeared perplexed, but remained silent. This letter would become the catalyst for the tragic events that unfolded later. The nightmare Chris had been evading was now becoming a harsh reality. Struggling with financial problems, he teetered on the brink of losing all his material possessions, and the impending ordeal was set to be known by everyone, something that he didn't really want. The thought of Kirsty and Jill losing the accustomed lifestyle proved unbearable for Christopher. Kirsty faced parting with her cherished horses, and the family had to face the likelihood of returning to Wolverhampton, bidding farewell to their luxurious way of life. For a man of Chris's pride, such a situation would be deeply humiliating. On August 21st, 2008, a friend reached out to Chris via text, inquiring about his well-being, in which he responded, "Not good. Things are coming to a head for me soon." This communication was the only insight the friend received, unaware of the underlying financial troubles Chris was grappling with. On August 25, 2008, the Fosters received an invitation to attend a barbecue and clay pigeon shooting event. The 50-year-old man, accompanied by his 49-year-old wife and their 15-year-old daughter, then proceeded to join the gathering. None of the attendees noticed any signs of distress in Chris or the other two family members. Witnesses recall Chris appearing his usual cheerful self, and even in this photo captured during the event, the family exuded happiness, oblivious to what Chris had planned for later that night. In the preceding week, Chris had delved deeply into suicide websites online and had spent the same afternoon reminiscing over old family photos in the album that reflected happier times. Expressing his desire to leave the party, Chris informed his wife that he had had enough for the night. Although Jill preferred to stay a bit longer, they eventually departed around 8:30 p.m., reaching home just minutes later at 8:44 p.m., with their final moments as a family captured by the home's security footage. Shortly after, Jill retired to bed. At 11:30 p.m., Chris went upstairs to check on Kirsty, urging her to go to bed as she continued texting a friend online. Around midnight, Chris decided to turn off the internet, compelling Kirsty to conclude her conversation with her friend and retire for the night. At 3 a.m., Chris set out to claim his first victim. Using a silenced gun, he entered the room where his wife was asleep and shot her in the back of the head as she lay unsuspecting. He then proceeded to Kirsty's room and inflicted a similar fate upon her. The home's security cameras captured Chris as he took one of his shotguns and ventured outside to the dog kennels. Each dog fell victim to a gunshot to the head as well. Chris then made his way to the barn housing the horses, repeating the same sinister act. Following this, he set the barn ablaze, with all the animals inside. In the footage, Chris appeared methodical and almost robotic, devoid of expression or any semblance of remorse. To impede the firefighters' access to the residence and hinder their efforts to extinguish the fire on time, Chris took action. He drove a horsebox and positioned it in front of the main entrance and shot the tires, deliberately puncturing them to make it harder to move. Subsequently, he strategically placed hosepipes connected to his domestic oil tank, pumping 200 liters of oil into the house's cellar. With his expertise in fires, Chris knew precisely what was required to utterly annihilate the Osbaston house. His mindset seemed rooted in a vengeful desire. If he couldn't retain his material possessions, then no one else should either. Chris then proceeded to ignite the house, dousing his cars and other belongings with the flammable liquid as well. The fire rapidly and fiercely consumed everything. Still armed with a rifle, Chris re-entered the house, making his way to the bedroom where Jill's lifeless body lay. There, he lay beside her, embracing his deceased wife amidst the engulfing flames. Chris's estranged brother, Andrew, speculated that Chris might have wanted the fire to consume him as punishment for his actions that night. It was reported that Chris succumbed to smoke inhalation, with the autopsy revealing no evidence of gunshot wounds, despite having the rifle close to him. At around 4:11 a.m., the security cameras had stopped functioning. A concerned neighbor contacted emergency services upon witnessing the escalating flames. Firefighters swiftly arrived at the residence, but they were met with the impeding horsebox at the main gate. By the time they successfully removed the obstacle, the intensity of the fire had already reached a point where it proved challenging to bring under control. As firefighters battled the raging blaze, neighbors watched in horror as the estate was consumed by flames, expressing deep concern for the now missing owners, the Fosters. In the subsequent days, newspapers and TV stations issued appeals to locate the family, but their efforts yielded no results. Given Chris's affluent status, authorities initiated an investigation, initially suspecting a criminal abduction of the Foster family. At this point, however, neither the bodies nor the security camera footage had been discovered, and so that was what many had speculated had happened to them. The arduous task of extinguishing the flames spanned 3 days. Finally, investigators cautiously entered the remnants of the house and discovered the intertwined remains of Jill and Christopher. Their bodies were bound together, laid on the bed in a room that had collapsed down to the living room area, where they were eventually found. However, there was no trace of Kirsty. Amidst hopeful speculation that she might have escaped, others feared the possibility of her abduction. A few days later, heartbreak ensued as small fragments of Kirsty's remains were discovered amidst the debris. Investigators, employing delicate precision, used brushes to gather Kirsty's remains into a waiting hearse. The discovery of a piece of Kirsty's skull revealed that, tragically, she had suffered a gunshot wound to the head, just like the fate that had befallen her mother. Upon recovering and scrutinizing the bodies, the police directed their suspicions toward Chris as the likely perpetrator of the crimes. Concurrently, an investigation into his financial affairs was initiated. The deeper they delved, the more revelations unfolded about a prosperous businessman who was, in reality, submerged in insurmountable debt. To everyone's surprise, Chris's accumulated debts had amounted to £4 million at that point. As creditors sought to claim his assets, they discovered that Chris had meticulously ensured there was nothing left for them. With the retrieval of security footage, the police confirmed their suspicions. Chris had carried out the murders and his own demise, leaving no note or indication of what he was going through. Speculation arose about the dark motives behind such a brutal crime, with the prevailing theory positing that Chris, consumed by shame over losing his fortune, opted for the heinous act to evade admitting his failures. Others suggested it was the defiant act of a self-centered man who chose to obliterate everything before facing the prospect of loss. Enid struggled with the distressing news, as did everyone else, but she adamantly rejected the notion that Chris could be capable of such actions. She staunchly defended him and harbored considerable sympathy for him. In her perspective, she believed Chris committed the acts out of love for his family, aiming to protect them from losing everything. However, Chris's brother Andrew held a contrasting viewpoint. Having not spoken for 16 years, there were fleeting thoughts of reconciliation for the sake of their mother. But fear restrained Andrew from going to his brother's house, with apprehensive thoughts of encountering a potentially hostile situation. Andrew asserted that Chris bullied him during their childhood and had even allegedly sexually assaulted him. This tumultuous history led Andrew to maintain silence for the 16 years. According to him, Chris exhibited traits of a bully and control freak. In response to Andrew's 1999 letter extending an olive branch for a mature conversation, Chris replied with a note demanding a written apology, adding, "You've got to beg and scrape on bended knee to come to me and Jill." Andrew contended that Chris was unwilling to acknowledge his wrongdoings and instead harbored long-standing grudges. 4 months after the devastating tragedy, on December 19, 2008, the funerals for 15-year-old Kirsty and 49-year-old Jill took place at their local village church. The joint funeral was silent and respectful, attended only by a small gathering of intimate friends and family. Both were laid to rest in the same plot. Following the wishes of Jill's family, Chris had a separate funeral and was interred away from Kirsty and Jill.
In the years subsequent to the tragedy at the Osbaston house, remnants of the scorched structures and the family's charred belongings, including Kirsty's cherished first aid book for her horses, and even a handwritten note outlining what the family had planned to eat during that week of the tragedy, still lingered on the site. The erstwhile dream home, now reduced to crumbling ruins, persisted until 2011, when all debris was cleared. The 16-acre estate was eventually purchased in 2014, with plans formulated for the construction of a new 6-bedroom house. Although the property was put up for sale in 2012, it remained unsold until 2014, after the price was said to have been reduced. While the motives behind Christopher Foster's shocking deeds may have stemmed from financial struggles and the societal pressure to uphold an affluent and successful facade, it definitely shouldn't have taken such a horrific turn. Tragically, rather than making prudent financial decisions initially or later confiding in his loved ones about his financial woes, Chris chose a path of self-destruction with devastating consequences for all involved. As we reflect on this heartbreaking case, our thoughts are with the victims whose lives were tragically cut short and the loved ones they left behind. Starved, tortured, and abused, failed by everyone from the parents to even child services, not shown love or even some pity. Not even remorse from the abusers who happened to be his own grandparents. That's what Jeffrey Baldwin went through at his tender age of 5 before his life was cut short. Jeffrey and his older sister had undergone one of the worst inhuman experiences a child would ever live through until Jeffrey couldn't anymore. On the evening of November 30th, 2002, a phone call was made by Jeffrey's grandmother to the emergency services. On rushing to the location, they were met with a disturbing scene of the emaciated, lifeless body of the young boy. His siblings, however, survived to tell the story of what really happened in their grandparents' house. This is the heartbreaking story of Jeffrey Baldwin. Born on January 20th, 1997, in Toronto, Canada, Jeffrey Baldwin was the son of Yvonne Kidman and Richard Baldwin and had 2 older sisters and a younger brother. He was a happy, healthy, and normal child and weighed an average weight for a baby his age. Life was normal as well, however. His parents were usually troubled, and with allegations of abuse and violence being leveled against them, and with them still being teenagers, they were deemed not fit to raise children, leading them to lose the custody of their 4 children by the summer of 1998. With the blessing, or rather the curse, of the Toronto Catholic Children's Aid Society, the children's care and well-being was handed over to the maternal grandparents, that is, Elva Bottineau and Norman Kidman, where life drastically changed, going from bad to the worst, especially for young Jeffrey and his older sister, who were for some unknown reason singled out as the bad kids. The oldest sister and the youngest brother were, however, considered the good kids and were treated normally, or if not, close to it. They were made to look down upon them and were warned by the grandparents not to talk about the other 2 to anyone, or even talk to them, or like them, and for that reason, they were terrified to do so. The oldest sister, understanding what was happening, still had pity and felt bad for them. A very energetic boy who loved Superman, who tried flying by jumping on and off chairs like every other kid his age did, was always joyful and loved being adventurous. One would never imagine that all that in one day was to be taken away from him. At that time, children were placed with immediate family members if the parents were not able to take care of them, so that the children could stay together and wouldn't have to be placed in group homes or under foster care. If a member of the children's extended family were able to take them, such as in this case the grandparents, it was seen as the most suitable solution. Elva, being a caregiver, was seen even better, as they believed that this was the right place for the children. Despite the 3-bedroomed household having 6 adults, that is the grandparents, their 2 daughters Yvette and Tammy and their boyfriends to squeeze in with 6 children, that is the 4 siblings, and their 2 cousins who were the children of Tammy, she would receive extra financial support for taking care of the children. What the child services didn't know, or didn't even try to find out, was that under the care of Norman and Elva, it was never a safe space, but rather a house full of agony. So what really happened behind the closed doors of this house, and what was the dark secrets that Norman and Elva had been covering for years? After Jeffrey's death and the shocking discovery of the state of his body and the conditions of the house, the children in the household were seized by the child services and sent to foster care, with the siblings ending up in a foster home under the care of an experienced foster mother. At first, cautious of their new surroundings, they were tight-lipped and couldn't even maintain eye contact for any length of time. But with time, and once they realized this was actually a safer place than where they were before, small bits of information came out from them revealing the traumatic events that they experienced. The foster mother recounted feeling both shocked and bewildered when they first asked if she had a pig wall and pig room in her house. The word pig apparently was a common phrase that was used to refer Jeffrey and his sister, who had gotten used to it. A photograph in which Jeffrey and his sister were sitting confined at a certain corner showed exactly what the children were describing as the pig wall. It's from there that if and when fed, they ate the leftovers of the meals that the rest of the people in the house had eaten, using a shared bowl which was called the pig bowl. This led to the malnourished state of their body, as they looked very small compared to children of their age, with their bodies having sores all over and developing distended bellies. On the second floor of the house was the bedroom in which Jeffrey and his sister spent every night and most of their days locked in, as if they were criminals. In here, there was no heat as the furnace vents were closed, and it was always dark, as the only window in the room was covered. They were usually not taken to hospital, and Jeffrey, unlike his sister and other siblings, didn't go to school as well. The reasoning behind this by the grandparents was that he was not well toilet trained, and therefore wouldn't be accepted. The sister was, however, threatened not to talk about Jeffrey and what they underwent at school, as the grandparents knew that the children's aid would come and seize all the children from them once they found out. They were not allowed to play outside like the other children. They had bright red skin on their legs which was caused by urine washing down to their feet, as they did not use the bathroom most of the time. The room had an awful stench that could even stick on your clothes when you came out of it, as described by one of the detectives. This was often due to their waste being all over the place, and on squeezing the mattresses that they slept on, urine would come out of them. Elva forced them to help clean up their mess by making them scrub the walls and clean their beds, and if they didn't do it well, they were hit by the mop and told, and I quote, "Hurry up, you pigs!" Norman would hit them with his hand, a slipper, or a newspaper if they misbehaved. The oldest sister described the lickings she witnessed her younger siblings going through where their grandfather spanked them with a metal spoon. They were lined up and had to remove their clothing and underpants, and when she asked him why they had to do that, she was answered so that they wouldn't bleed on the clothes. They were sometimes let out of the room for what was described as exercise, where they were basically forced to walk around the kitchen, and if they stopped, they were thrown objects at and called names, the likes of pig and other abusive terms. And if you thought that this by far was the most evil level they could reach, well, it gets worse from here. The two children were not only deprived of good food, but also water, which reverted them to animal instinct, as on one occasion after their arrival to the new foster home, the girl was found drinking water from the toilet, an occurrence that horrified the foster mother. And when she asked her why she drank from the toilet, she simply answered that that was where she and her brother used to drink water from in the previous house. She explained further that they had to wash themselves and their underwear using the toilet water, and that it was the idea of their grandmother. Another occurrence was when the girl was eating very quickly at the dining table as she had an insatiable appetite. The foster mother heard the youngest one saying that if she puked it, she had to eat it, because at their grandmother's house that's what they did. At school, some of her teachers thought that something was amiss, as she would often smell like urine, and during snack times, her insatiable appetite was in display. The teachers, having concerns about the young girl, however, chose not to report anything about the matter. And with the children also afraid to share what they went through, this meant that no one could rescue them. Around the year 2000, one of the workers from the Catholic Children's Aid Society made a short visit to Elva and Norman's household, which had been the first visit in a long time. During the visit, the worker had noticed that there had been a bruise under Jeffrey's eye. Had the worker done their due diligence, the children could have been immediately taken, and young Jeffrey would probably still be alive to this day. The injury had, however, been quickly dismissed as a small accident, and no action was taken to further investigate Jeffrey and his siblings' home life with their grandparents. The oldest sister further revealed that the only time she ever recalled seeing Jeffrey smile was when their parents visited them, a thing that didn't really happen often as one would think. Unlike Yvonne's two sisters and their boyfriends who lived in that house and did nothing to help the children but rather watch them suffer and Jeffrey dying slowly, Richard and Yvonne didn't live there and had limited access to their own kids, which was controlled by the highly manipulative grandmother. A long manipulative plan to take over the care of the children had for years been in play. The moment problems had started arising, the child services were involved as Yvonne and Richard had left one of their children unattended. The child was supposed to stay with the grandparents for only a couple of months as the parents fixed their issues. Long before they knew it, they had already filed for custody 2 months in, and with the help of the Catholic Children's Aid Society, they got it.
Elva was secretly recording their phone calls and taking notes of them, all in an effort to prove that they were unfit, eventually getting what she wanted, the children's custody. Question is, though, didn't they notice Jeffrey's physical state during their visits? Well, apparently they did. And on questioning Elva why Jeffrey was smaller, even to the point his younger brother was outgrowing him, and why he hadn't been potty trained yet, she always had an answer for everything, or as I would say, a manipulative excuse for this. She claimed that everyone always thought that Jeffrey would grow up to be short, since there were a lot of short people in the family. She further argued that it was the steroids in the cream that his younger brother used for his eczema condition, which made him grow faster than Jeffrey. Only thing left to do, according to them, was to just trust her word, even after they were banned from entering their room, and also after discovering that it was mostly locked. Oddly enough, they were told by Elva herself that the children were drinking from the toilet, and on asked if this did not make them concerned, this is what they had to say.
Didn't that cause you to be a little bit concerned?
We voice concerns, but then all we get is arguments, and basically, if you don't like the way things look, leave.
The same ultimatum was also given to everyone else in the house who tried to voice their concerns. James Mills, Yvette's boyfriend who lived with them, gave his statement saying he always thought the treatment of Jeffrey and his sister was deplorable as they were treated and lived like dogs, while the other children in the household were treated completely different, even the ones that Elva babysat from outside. He had told her on a number of times to get help for Jeffrey as he tried to protest for him due to Jeffrey's skinny frame that kept on getting worse. However, she declined, insisting that it would ruin her check as those kids were $600 to her every month. In short, all she cared about was the extra money that she received that was intended to help her raise them in a good environment and the best way possible. But instead, it was the other way round. With him not paying the rent of the house, he knew if he further insisted on the matter, he would be kicked out. Trying to talk to his girlfriend so that she could try talking to her parents was in vain, as she too was afraid of raising the issue, and would even spark an argument as she asked him in a rather peculiar way, "What do you want me to do?" James and Jeffrey's oldest sister had shared their memories of the days before Jeffrey passed away. The sister described how the day before he died, that Elva wrapped him in a blanket and set him in front of the TV, but he wasn't able to keep his head up as it kept falling down. Elva, however, brushed it off, assuming he was just being lazy, not knowing what was really happening. James had been watching him the nights before as he crawled up the stairs too weak to even walk on his own, his little pajamas falling off because he had no hips. He knew that his condition was really bad and Jeffrey's life was in deep trouble. As he was playing video games in the next room, he heard coughing and sobbing coming from the locked room where Jeffrey spent his last moments in. Afraid to risk his free stay at the house, he did nothing. And on the evening of November 30th, 2002, Jeffrey succumbed to his poor health conditions, with the cause of death being as a result of septic shock and bacterial pneumonia. However, it was also evident that he had suffered due to prolonged starvation and abuse. The grandmother, as mentioned earlier on in the video, called the medical services, saying that her grandson was not breathing. When the ambulance arrived, the paramedics instantly became aware that Jeffrey had been abused. A report was made by a pathologist, Dr. Gregory Wilson, where he stated that his body was covered in bruises, sores and abrasions, and he was starved for a long period of time, that he only weighed 21 pounds or around 9.5 kilograms, which was even less than his weight at his first birthday. Jeffrey had no muscle tone or body fat, and his clothes were always falling off of him because he was so skeletal. Additionally, he had ulcers on his genitals, and a few days before his death, a fecal bacteria had gotten into his bloodstream, causing septic shock that would have made it difficult for him to breathe. Jeffrey had most likely placed his fingers into his mouth, transferring the bacteria into his lungs. A pediatric nutritionist, Dr. Stanley Zlotkin, examined Jeffrey's case and stated that in all his years of research in third world countries at the time, he had never seen a child that was starved and stunted to such an extent. With immediate effect, the children in the household were all seized and placed under foster care by the Catholic Children's Aid Society, where the siblings ended up under the care of the foster mother, as stated earlier. Toronto police were immediately on the case, of course, but it was complicated by the fact that the Catholic Children's Aid Society were involved in the family's collective life, Jeffrey's 3 siblings and 2 young cousins being seized and placed in foster care, and some changes in the homicide squad. It must have seemed to Elva and Norman that nothing much was happening, as they had not yet been arrested and thought they had got away with the murder, and so They got themselves busy. The room where Jeffrey and his sister used to be locked up in was cleaned up and painted. With the new look, no one would have guessed what heinous atrocities took place in there, where the two urine and feces stained mattresses that when pressed fluid would gush out had once served as beds of continuous pain and suffering for Jeffrey and his sister. There were now proper beds with pillows and warm blankets. They, apparently with their high degree of audacity, had done the makeover ready to welcome back the three siblings home. Around the same time as well, Bottineau was back in family court trying to get back Jeffrey's siblings out of foster care and back in her home. However, she and her husband were arrested later that month on March 19, 2003, and charged with second-degree murder and forcible confinement, with the former's charge in relation to Jeffrey's death and the latter's for the locking up of his sister. During their interviews with the investigators, they didn't say anything at all, as they showed no emotion and no remorse when they were shown photos of Jeffrey. On further investigations, revelations of their seemingly dark past records were uncovered. A deed that, if it had been carried out by the Catholic Children's Aid Society, would have ruled them out of being given the responsibility of raising, let alone the Baldwin siblings, but any child at all. A background check on them would have shown them that Elva had a child abuse conviction back in 1970, with her own daughter Eva being the victim. The 5-month-old baby had died of pneumonia in 1969, and on further investigation of Eva's death, it was discovered that she had multiple fractures on her body. It had even made it to the local newspaper as a major story that shocked many at the time, with Elva being sentenced to 1 year of probation. In 1978, Norman was convicted of assaulting 2 of Elva's children from a previous relationship and was given a sentence of 2 years of probation. The 2 children had undergone the same cruel treatment that Jeffrey and his sister experienced before being seized by the same child services that helped the 2 to get custody of the 4 children 2 decades later. One of the children, Fred, shared his experience.
As a child, I can remember being, stuffed into a dog cage. Me and my sister being put into a metal dog bin.
He and his sister were shown nothing but abuse in that house. They, similarly to Jeffrey and his sister, reverted to animal instinct.
It sounds gross, but I have to say it, but when they go to flush the toilet, there's clean water. Well, we assumed was clean water. The toilet was never, all that clean, to be honest. But you take out what you could with your hand and drink it out of your hand.
Same thing and similar experiences, only 2 decades apart. The same child services agency was also involved and ever present in that apartment. The caseworker for the agency knew they were being beaten and would argue with Elva to get her act together and take care of them. But it ended there, as there was no evidence that the Children's Aid took any action. And according to Fred, the visits made by the caseworker were another excuse for Elva and Norman's thrashings.
And the minute she was gone, the door would unlock and we'd get beaten because she'd end up showing up because of us screaming or carrying on.
What led to them being saved was when Fred's sister showed up to school with bruises, forcing the Child's Aid to act as the children were taken and put up for adoption. As mentioned earlier, Norman was arrested and given the 2-year probation after being fined only $300 when he pleaded guilty. However, he still stayed with the family, which at this point had grown to include their 3 daughters, with the Child's Aid always monitoring. By the 80s, Elva Bottineau had already been through 2 psychological evaluations, and both of them stated that Elva should not be in care of children, and therefore she shouldn't have been deemed fit to even take care of her daughters. Surprisingly, she was now even sponsored by the Child's Aid as a daycare giver, as they paid her to even take care of other people's children. This would also lead to them being helped to get custody of the Baldwin siblings, as mentioned earlier. The investigators weren't the only ones surprised with how careless the Child's Aid was in helping them get the custody. Elva's son, Fred, had some years before Jeffrey's death re-established contact with her, trying to find answers as to why she treated them with such cruelty, only to discover that despite having been allowed to raise 3 more children, she now even had her grandchildren living with her.
She told me she had custody of all 4 kids. I'm like, how did you get custody of all 4 kids?
And you were surprised because...
Because of the fact that she actually got adoption of those kids. After all me and my sister went through, and this lady is still able to keep 3 kids, plus take on the adoption of the other 4 kids. I'm sorry, I don't have the highest grade in high school or the highest education, but it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out. It's like there's something wrong.
That was also the time he saw the state of Jeffrey as well.
His ribs would be all sunken, his arms were really thin and skinny. That triggered an alarm in me. Like, I was like that.
You remember looking like that?
Oh, of course.
So when you saw Jeffrey and you had concerns, I mean, did you think maybe I should go to the authorities? Maybe I should go to Children's Aid? Maybe I should warn them about this woman if they don't know?
I thought of it, but at the same point, it was the thing that kept coming back to me was that, look, she's got Children's Aid knows that they're here. Normally they do their checkups and whatever occasionally, Like, I don't know why they wouldn't have seen something like that happening. Maybe I should have said something or done something, but I didn't.
The court declared they had kept Jeffrey and his sister locked in a bedroom where he lived in his own feces and left them to drink from a toilet. The judge was told that the pair used the children as a source of income, collecting government support checks, while offering little or none in return. 3 years later, on April 7, 2006, they were convicted of second-degree murder by Justice David Watt in the Ontario Superior Court of Justice, with the sentencing being delivered on June 9, 2006. Elva Bottineau was sentenced to 22 years in prison, that is until 2028, and Norman Kidman 20 years, that is until 2026, before they respectively become eligible for parole. The Catholic Children's Aid Society claimed to have no previous knowledge of the grandparents' child abuse conviction from the 70s, and they stated that they only learned of this fact in 2002, after Jeffrey had died. There had been, however, a record of the abuse conviction in the Children's Aid Society's own files. For whatever reason, the agency had claimed to have no knowledge about Elva and Norman's child abuse records at the time of the children's placement with them. Perhaps they knew, but they just didn't care, or wouldn't admit for obvious reasons. At the time, the Ministry of Children and Youth Services didn't have a requirement to look into child welfare records when it came to putting children with their extended family. Ontario believed that family preservation meant everything, even if it was detrimental to the child to be placed with certain relatives, as was the case with Jeffrey and his siblings. Michael Davis, a detective investigating the case, told the coroner's counsel that he would have charged every single adult that lived in that home for their negligence. However, the Provincial Child and Family Services Act, while imposing on all citizens the duty to report if they suspect a child is suffering, they couldn't be punished as only professionals such as doctors, nurses, teachers and social workers that may be involved with children can be charged under the Act, and only they are subject to a fine not exceeding $1,000 at the time. As for criminal charges, he said, only those with the duty of care, meaning Bottineau and Kidman, could be charged. The detective, however, wasn't the only witness who thought the witless adults who lived in that house and watched the destruction of that child without lifting a finger to help were responsible in his death. Osiris Villalobos, the after-hours child aids worker who visited the home with the police after leaving the hospital, wept on the witness stand as he remembered the stench of Jeffrey's sad room and how the smell of urine was so strong that it stayed on his clothes. The room, he said, was totally different from the other bedrooms in the small house, where the adults and the favored children lived completely different. He would have also charged them if it were up to him, he added, while wiping his tears. Osiris wasn't involved in the case file and the agency's failure to check the records of Elva and Norman. Jeffrey's paternal grandmother Susan Demetriadis testified as she stated that all her desperate attempts to see her grandson were ignored by the Child's Aid, and that if she had gotten the chance, she would have taken him without even caring about the police coming after her. Elva and Norman had made appeals, but in March 3, 2011, the Court of Appeal for Ontario dismissed both of them. Bottineau's lawyer had argued that she wasn't smart enough to realize Jeffrey would die, and Kidman, for some unknown reason, had asked the court to quash his murder conviction and instead sent him to prison for manslaughter. In January 19, 2012, the Supreme Court of Canada decided not to hear any other appeal from Elva. In September 9, 2013, a coroner's inquest into Jeffrey's death was started. The main goal of the inquest was not to place blame on those involved, but to explore the systemic issues that had taken place in relation to Jeffrey's death. The reason why the inquest took place more than a decade after Jeffrey had died was because Elva Bottineau had exhausted all of her appeals the previous year. There have been a great deal of changes in the child welfare system since Jeffrey Baldwin's death, in which the Catholic Children's Aid Society stated that Elva and Norman's horrific child abuse convictions would not go unnoticed if he was to be placed in that home after these changes took place. In February 14, 2014, the coroner's jury ruled the boy's death a homicide and delivered 103 recommendations. The Ontario Association of Children's Aid Societies and the Children's Aid Societies both conducted reviews of the recommendations that were directed towards all the Ontario's Children's Aid Societies. These recommendations required the Child Services to do a thorough background check of criminal records and identify the caregiver's identity. The new changes to the child welfare system meant that relatives who became caregivers would be subjected to the same standards as adoptive and foster parents. They would need to go through family history, background, and record checks to ensure that they could provide adequate care in a decent environment and, most importantly, a good home. Despite the fact that he lived a short life, he will still be remembered for his boisterous energy, beautiful smile, and being a lovely boy. A bronze statue of him, dressed as his favorite superhero Superman, was put in Greenwood Park in Toronto to honor his memory, and as a symbol to everyone to show how important it is to be diligent and shed light to child abuse, with a strong reminder that children should get better treatment and, most importantly, to be shown love, the love that unfortunately Jeffrey Baldwin and his sister were not given. In a heart-wrenching tale of tragedy, meet Ever Blanco Puig, a young soul taken too soon at just 16 years old. For 18 agonizing years, her story remained shrouded in darkness until the truth, once elusive, finally surfaced through DNA samples unmasking the face of the perpetrator. For 18 long years, the questions haunted those who loved her. Who could do such a thing? Why was justice so elusive? But the memory of Ever's radiant spirit never faded, as it was forever etched in the hearts of those she left behind, and thus the relentless pursuit of justice for their loved one never ceased. Ever Blanco Puig was born on February 17, 1981 in Spain to Manuel Blanco and Olga Puig. By 1997, the couple loving a quiet and peaceful life, they had already settled in Algepe, a small municipality of Madrid that was well away from all the bustle of the capital, together with their 3 daughters, Ever, Rebecca, and Maria. Ever, among her closest companions and beloved kin, was often portrayed as a rather quiet girl, yet exuded an enchanting air of mirth and dependability and was an absolute delight to be around. She also thrived in the realm of athletic pursuits, with her passion for sports illuminating her days with unbridled joy. At school, she found herself embraced by a multitude of admirers for her magnetic charisma and warm-hearted nature that knew no bounds. Ever always set a good example to her younger sisters, and with her being a responsible girl, she did not give her parents great displeasure as she complied with all the rules that they dictated, with one of them being the curfew that they had always set for her. However, on this fateful day, things did not go as planned. On the afternoon of the 19th of April, Ever and her friends were playing tennis as they enjoyed the carefree moments that only youth could offer, but little did they know that this seemingly ordinary afternoon would take a dark and harrowing turn. As the sun dipped below the horizon, being a Saturday, they decided to go to a local disco to cherish their unbreakable bonds of friendship and spend more time with each other, extending it into the late night. Ever had already asked her mother for permission to extend her curfew slightly, and Olga, seeing that her daughter had always been responsible, she rewards her as they agree that by midnight she should already be back home. The clock struck 11:30 p.m., and little by little the group bid their farewells, heading home, and among them was Blanco, whose journey home would unfortunately lead her into the shadows of mystery. Accompanied by her friend, Ever ventured towards a vacant lot that served as a shortcut to her home. It was a path she had walked countless times before, but destiny had something else in store for her. At around 11:45 p.m., they parted ways as Blanco took her familiar path through the dark, vacant lot with no inkling that it would be their last goodbye. As midnight approached, Ever's mother grew restless, her heart burdening with worry as her daughter failed to arrive home.
She reached out to Ever's friends, hoping for any clue to her whereabouts, only to be told that everyone had already parted their ways and Ever should have already arrived at home by then. This rang her alarm bells as she alerts her husband, who is a tow truck driver, who then begins searching for Ever in the town, together with his nephew, a local police officer, and also with the help of the father of one of Ever's friends. When the clock struck 1 a.m., Blanco's parents reported her disappearance at the local civil guard station, but to their dismay, the officers showed little concern for filing a disappearance of just little over an hour. The guard at the door callously dismissed the seriousness of the situation, claiming that children of her age were all on drugs and she was probably lying in a doorway or on some sidewalk, clearly implying she was not worth that much attention to them. In the darkness of the night, Blanco's father made a harrowing journey to the local civil guard station for up to 15 times. With frustration in his heart, he criticized the institution for their lack of urgency in searching rural roads or utilizing vehicles before sunrise. He accused them of neglect, citing a shortage of gas as their excuse, but the civil guards refuted his claims, defending their customary practice of waiting for a few hours to pass before initiating a search after a missing person report. A father's plea for his daughter's safe return hung in the balance as the truth behind the delay remained shrouded in doubt and despair. As the night deepened, the frantic search for Blanco commenced at 2:30 a.m. Her family, friends, and authorities scoured the streets of the town and the surrounding area, but the civil guard had not yet filed a missing report until 8 a.m. when they decided to do so. At noon, Blanco's family reached out to the regional TV station Telemadrid, imploring them for help to publicize the case. At 9 a.m., Ever's lifeless body had been discovered by two elderly residents of Ajalbir, 6 kilometers away from Algete, near a road construction site between Cobeña and Belvis de Jarama. The area was reputed to be frequented by young couples looking for privacy inside the cars. At first, they suspected a dreadful accident, thinking she might have been run over by a car, but when the civil guard arrived, the horrifying truth emerged. Blanco, lying face down on the ground, had been mercilessly stabbed multiple times while desperately trying to escape her assailant. The clothes she wore on the day of her disappearance, that is a pair of jeans, a dark sweater, and mountain boots, clung to her lifeless form, with only one sleeve of her jacket missing, hinting at a sinister struggle. The investigators believed that both Blanco and her killer had arrived at the scene in a vehicle, but heavy rain during the night had erased any tire tracks or crucial forensic evidence. Despite the challenging circumstances, the investigators discovered faint footprints from Blanco and a foreboding clue of footprints of a man wearing size 42 moccasins, providing a faint glimmer of hope in their pursuit of justice for the innocent soul lost. The civil guard notified Blanco's family of the discovery at 3:30 p.m. The news caused commotion in the town of just 12,300 people at the time, with no recent instances of violent crime. At around 7 p.m., 200 people gathered silently before Blanco's home to condemn her murder. Her funeral was held on the 23rd of April and was attended by 2,000 people. In a devastating revelation from the autopsy report, Ever endured a horrifying fate, suffering 19 stab wounds to her back, leading to her tragic demise due to blood loss around 4 a.m. The murder weapon, a navaja-style knife, between 8 and 10 centimeters long and 1 centimeter wide, became a terrifying instrument of her torment. The first stab occurred while she was still in a vehicle, while the subsequent ones followed as she desperately tried to run up a slope beside the road. Many of the wounds, particularly those on her ear and the back of her head, were distressingly deemed passionate in nature, adding to the brutality of the crime. Among the horrifying details, the first injuries stood out deep and potentially fatal, even without the additional wounds inflicted later.
The tragedy did not end there, as the evidence revealed the heartbreaking violation of Blanco's innocence. Her hymen was torn, and the presence of the same man's bodily fluid was discovered in her mouth, genitals, and underwear, testimony to a heinous act that defies comprehension. The discovery of a red fiber in her mouth that was identified as a common car upholstery by the Catalonia Textile Museum and Documentation Center confirmed that Blanco had been in a vehicle after her abduction. These shocking details painted a heart-rending picture of the unspeakable pain and suffering endured by this innocent soul in her final moments. Due to the body being found dressed and showing no apparent signs of violence, both the coroner and officers initially speculated that the sexual encounter may have been consensual, leading to a fatal altercation afterward. In stark contrast, Ever's grieving parents firmly believed that their daughter had been abducted, sexually assaulted at knife point, and then murdered to prevent her from seeking justice for the heinous act. The civil guard anticipated that the case would be closed after a short investigation, with their prevailing theory pointing towards a single individual known to Blanco. Allegedly, this person approached her in a car offering a ride that she accepted, leading them to the secluded construction site, a well-known lover's lane where the tragic events unfolded. Blanco's ex-boyfriend residing in Fuente El Saz, who had recently separated from her, became an initial suspect, but he was cleared following police questioning. Subsequently, the focus of the investigation shifted towards adult men known to Blanco's family, individuals that she might have trusted to board their vehicle. However, as time went on, the case revealed layers of complexity, and the possibility of a stranger being responsible could no longer be excluded. Blanco's friends passionately asserted that she would never accept a ride from an unknown person, insisting that she must have been forced into the car. Adding to the mystery, some neighbors linked the crime to a strange blue car spotted in town following another girl around midnight, with one of the occupants being a blonde man approximately 20 years old. Unfortunately, nobody managed to note down the car's license plate, leaving a crucial piece of the puzzle untraceable. The discovery of an unidentified male bodily fluid on the young woman's body and clothes during the investigation was concealed from Blanco's family and the public, as the officers secretly collected DNA samples from her male relatives and acquaintances to compare with the fluid's DNA. Ever's father's sample was obtained from a discarded cigarette he smoked while drinking coffee and discussing the case with the civil guard officers, while others were surreptitiously taken during unrelated blood alcohol content tests or from the cups and glasses they used in bars. Despite not finding any matches, the civil guard remained steadfast in their belief that the perpetrator was an adult male residing in Algete or a nearby town. The pursuit of justice continued in the shadows, while the heartbroken family yearned for answers that instead created more questions. 8 months after the tragic incident, Blanco's mother found in her daughter's room 2 hidden notebooks that were labeled 95 to 96 and 96 to 97. Within these pages, Blanco had meticulously chronicled her daily experiences until the day of her murder. The entries predominantly featured the names Ever and Miguel, referring to her ex-boyfriend, written repeatedly in various pen colors. However, just 2 pages before the final one, the names Ever and Miguel were replaced with Ever and 343110. Despite numerous efforts to decipher the significance of the number, all attempts proved futile. Speculation surrounding the number ranged from it being related to the phone code of Spain, which is 34, and the postal code of the town, which is 110, to yet again being associated with a pager number from a Coca-Cola promotion at that time. The mystery of the number remained unsolved, leaving Blanco's loved ones and investigators haunted by the enigmatic clue. Upon learning that his DNA had been compared to the fluid's one that was found in his daughter's body and him being excluded as a suspect, Blanco's father initiated a campaign to rally other residents of Algete for voluntary DNA samples to aid in apprehending his daughter's killer. With the support of Mayor Jesus Herrera Fernandez, an official announcement was made in November 1999, urging all male residents over 16 years old, estimated to be 5,000 individuals, to voluntarily provide their hair or saliva samples. However, Spanish judicial organizations unanimously rejected the proposition, deeming it simple-minded, disproportionate, useless, and potentially stigmatizing for those who chose not to provide their DNA without a court order, which was their legal right to do so. They also believed that the culprit would obviously not volunteer to provide their sample. Nevertheless, Blanco's father managed to collect 2,013 samples from the residents of Algete and nearby towns, depositing them at the local courthouse until further decisions were made. The examining magistrate of the case sought a report from Madrid's chief prosecutor to assess the legal feasibility of such tests. The response that was issued on March 30, 2000, emphasized that testing should be limited to individuals who could be considered suspicious based on the investigation rather than merely volunteers. Consequently, only samples from 45 people were tested, including 12 relatives from Ever's father's and mother's sides, her acquaintances, and individuals with a prior criminal record, with a particular focus on cases involving sexual misconduct and knife violence. The search for justice persisted amidst the legal complexities and the never-ending determination of those that seek the truth behind Ever's tragic fate. Despite the case hitting a standstill, the homicide group of the Civil Guard remained resolute, never allowing it to fade into oblivion over the years. Each new member and commander took it upon themselves to revisit the case file, hoping to bring a fresh perspective. The investigation expanded beyond borders, with information sought from various law enforcement agencies, including the Rechtsanza and the FBI. A DNA specialist from the University of Santiago de Compostela re-examined the evidence, revealing that the DNA belonged to a man of non-European descent. Over the years, the number of individuals investigated soared to 1,503, including 208 men from Algete and neighboring towns who voluntarily underwent DNA testing, even encompassing criminals on leave during the time of the murder. A new examining magistrate allowed the opening and checking of the 2013 envelopes containing the names of the volunteers from 1999, but not the testing of all DNA samples. La Sexta's investigative show, Equipo de Investigación, aired an episode about the case titled Ever, a Cold Case, on April 26, 2013, that featured interviews with Blanco's loved ones and experts. Psychologist and criminologist Vicente Garrido proposed the theory of a stalker as the likely perpetrator, challenging the Civil Guard's secret boyfriend hypothesis. The lack of defensive wounds suggested threats, and the criminal could be of low intelligence, uneducated, and emotionally immature, given that he was seeking intimacy with a teenager instead of a woman his age. He might have had no family, as they would have noticed his late-night activities, and the possibility of him continuing his crimes elsewhere or being imprisoned for other attacks was considered. Following the program's broadcast, a woman came forward to authorities reporting that she had seen a suspicious man at the road construction site around 8 a.m. before Ever's body had been found. The man appeared disheveled, walking in the rain without an umbrella, looking like he hadn't slept through the night and was searching for something before getting into a white Renault 18. The Civil Guard considered her testimony reliable, as other witnesses had also reported a Renault 18 over the years, which matched the fiber found on Blanco's body. On October 28 of 2013, a facial composite of the suspect made in collaboration with the new witness was released. The man was described to be between 35 and 40 years old in 1997, around 1.7 to 1.8 meters tall, corpulent with his weight between 75 to 80 kilograms, with short spiky brown hair, a square and hardened face, and dark sunken eyes. He was said to be dressed in a white shirt and a V-neck sweater, and he drove a white Renault 18 with red upholstery. To gather tips, a confidential phone number and email address were set up, resulting in 100 emails received by January 1st of 2014. By the end of 2013, a breakthrough in the investigation revealed that the fluid's DNA pointed to a man of North African descent. The civil guard petitioned the 300 North African men who lived in Algete in 1997 for voluntary samples. Fouad Chel, a former neighbor of Blanco's now residing in southern France, shared a remarkable genetic match with the killer, indicating possible sibling relationship. Further analysis of a brother living in Murcia who had never lived in Algete yielded an identical match, leading to a European arrest warrant for the third brother, Ahmed Chel Gerge. On October 1, 2015, Ahmed was apprehended outside his workplace in Besançon in France in a joint operation involving the Civil Guard and the French Gendarmerie. Ahmed Chel Gerge, born on March 1, 1963 in Taza, Morocco, was 34 years old during the time of the murder. He married a 20-year-old Spanish woman in Madrid in 1989 and obtained Spanish citizenship in the 1990s, and they went on to have children. At the time of Blanco's murder, Chel's wife was 5 months pregnant. They never appeared as residents of Algete since they lived in a caravan provided by Chel's employer at a plant nursery where he worked as a delivery man. Their residence, located next to the Paracuellos de Jarama Fuente El Sas road, was approximately 4 kilometers away from the crime scene. In 1999, the Chel family moved to France, where although they continued to be listed as married in Spain, they had separated amicably. Chel remarried to a 24-year-old Moroccan student in Besançon in 2003, settling in a village approximately 20 kilometers from the Swiss border, and went on to have children as well. While in France, he worked as a welder for a farm machinery company, but his relationship with coworkers was reportedly troubled. When confronted with the DNA evidence, Chel claimed that 2 unidentified men brought him to Blanco's body and forced him to touch himself over her body. However, his ex-wife contradicted this account, informing journalists that Ahmed had actually gone out with his brothers, as they often did during the weekends. She revealed that one of the brothers had disclosed that they were at the same disco as Blanco and had spoken to her after she argued with her ex-boyfriend. While Blanco initially left the disco with the brothers, she returned inside with her friends around 11 p.m. Surprisingly, Chel's ex-wife stated that neither she nor the brothers had ever been interrogated by the police or the civil guard during the investigation. While she denied any mistreatment by Chel, she later admitted to his aggressive behavior when under the influence of alcohol. Descriptions from former coworkers and female customers portrayed him as unsociable, aggressive when drunk, and inappropriate towards women. Blanco's family had minimal interaction with Chel's brother at most and had never even met Chel himself. On October 5, 2015, Chel attempted to harm himself in his cell but agreed to be deported to Spain for trial 2 days later. At the preliminary hearing on October 13th, he declined to make a statement but provided a DNA sample. Charged with murder, sexual assault, and illegal detention, he was held in Soto del Real prison pending trial as the DNA testing confirmed his involvement. On October 19th, Chel's defense unsuccessfully requested his release pending trial, arguing lack of evidence besides DNA and that the civil guard's hypothesis over the past 18 years suggested that Ever willingly got into a car with someone she knew, engaging in consensual intercourse before her tragic death. Therefore, they believed that there was no sense in charging Chel with sexual assault.
Due to the idea of Blanca willingly accepting a ride from the Moroccan, given her friend's assurance that she would never get into a car with a stranger, also made them believe he had no involvement. Chell's lawyer argued that Blanca would never willingly associate with a Moroccan due to alleged neo-Nazi sympathies evidenced in her diaries, linking her to the investigation's early focus on the neo-Nazi group Bases Autónomas. However, Blanco's friends refuted any connection to neo-Nazis. Chell's first wife sparked another conspiracy theory during an interview with TVE's La Mañana, suggesting the involvement of several people known to the Chell family and hinting at those responsible for the murder. She claimed that Chell returned home between 10 o'clock and 11 p.m. that night, citing her pregnancy as the reason he wouldn't stay out late. According to her, he mentioned being mugged by some boys, but didn't report it due to fear. In January 2016, prison psychiatric support lifted the anti-suicide measures from Chell, who claimed he was forced to please himself on Blanco, denying any penetration but was unable to explain how his bodily fluid was found in her genital area. On January 29, 2016, Chell was discovered dead in his cell, having taken his own life by hanging himself with his shoelaces. The prosecution was officially concluded on February 15, 2016. Ever's family, while finding some closure in knowing who had murdered their daughter, felt disappointed that he did not face the consequences for his wicked deeds, but believed that justice would be hopefully served in the afterlife.
Ever Blanco Puig had dreams of becoming an architect and had a passion for drawing. She was an ardent fan of Bon Jovi and also African music. Her sensitivity and sincerity created strong bonds with her friends, and her strong laughter became a defining trait of her personality. She was a responsible and caring older sister, always setting a positive example to her younger sisters. The story of Ever Blanco echoes through time, a story of loss, pain, and the relentless pursuit of justice. As we remember her, we also remember the strength of a community united, seeking answers and closure for the young girl whose life was taken too soon.